All right, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. This is the Black Rant Podcast. Getting everything set up and situated and trying to make it as pleasurable of an experience for all of us involved. On this particular stream, we're going to talk about the American Compass, the 5th anniversary gala, in which Marco Rubio and JD Vance both attended and they spoke, and I think it's the perfect opportunity to highlight these two individuals. I was actually looking to see, is Marco Rubio, was he born in the United States? Was he actually is he a U.S. citizen and naturalized and born in the United States? Because I know his family is Cuban, but I mean, he's run for president before, but so did Ted Cruz, and Ted Cruz is born in Canada. So I have no idea what, sometimes I got to just go back through and double check. But what I have seen in the last few months of this Trump presidency has been really, really, really Marco Rubio has gone from Little Marco, as he was called by Trump. He's gone from Little Marco to being this extraordinary statesman, deal maker, very eloquent. Like he's like formulating himself into a Trump 2.0. But this event, this American Compass event, was like almost the perfect event to show the dichotomy, the differences between these two individuals who are essentially one of the two will be an heir apparent to Donald Trump. One of the two is going to become the next leading figure in the Republican Party. And it's so interesting to see what's going on here. It's so interesting to look at how they both operate, how they deal with the press, the media, how they deal with criticisms. So I'm going to play the clip of Rubio. And then the clip is longer for JD Vance. He talks for like 40 minutes or something like that, mostly about America and bringing back manufacturing and all these different things. But I'm going to clip the short part for Marco Rubio, and then I'll comment about it. And then, I'll talk a little bit about JD Vance as well. But since his part is so much longer, we're not going to spend a whole bunch of time on that. I'm just going to kind of give my take on it. So here we go. We're going to get started.
Chris, for the introduction. Did you get my office? Yeah, he just said, the one I used to have, the one in Russell? Yeah. Did you find any cash or gold bars? No. Is there media here? It's a joke. It's a joke. You guys know. Thank you, Chris, for that introduction, and actually very proud of the work he did with us on the Small Business Committee, and Orrin and everyone here in American Compass for hosting me here tonight. A couple observations of seeing someone. We really only got to serve together for like 10 days, because I got confirmed pretty quickly. And by the way, the president was I got 99 out of 100 votes because the vice president at the time has seated up and filled. And the president, for some period of time, expressed great concern about the fact that I had 99 votes in the Senate. He didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. But I told him recently, sir, you don't have to worry about that anymore. I don't think I'd get 99 votes now. And anyways, but thank you for this chance to speak to you. And by one more thing I want to tell you about, I spent, now that I'm in an executive branch, we oftentimes have to deal with the fact that, we want to do something. And it's like, well, but there's a statute or there's a law.
Hello, my name is Adam Ferrari, the Chief Executive Officer.
Commercial! YouTube commercials, all right.
That limit our ability to do things by executive action. It requires us to go through certain steps. And so I increasingly find myself saying, who the hell wrote these laws? And today I was reminded it was actually me who passed a certain law that stood as an impediment to quick action. So anyways, yeah, I've grown in my appreciation for the executive branch more and more each day. And but that's also, the media is going to say, oh, he's for an authoritarian form of government. No, I just, some of these laws I passed are getting in the way of my current life. So we have to work through it. We will. But thank you guys for this chance and the work that you've done. And I know that obviously you're going to spend a lot of time focused on domestic decisions, but I want to hopefully pitch you a little bit tonight about what I've learned and what I already believe coming into this job, that so much about what happens domestically, economically, is increasingly intertwined in geopolitics. It always has been. I think that's one of the lessons we forgot, but I think we've been reminded of that. here most recently, and a number of events have brought that to bear. The first thing I would say is I think it's always been true. One of the amazing things, one of the reasons why history repeats itself, people like to say that, is because human nature does not change. Technology's changed, what the clothes we wear change, even languages change, governments change, a lot of things change. But the one thing that is unchanged is human nature. It's the same today as it was 5,000 years ago, and that's one of the reasons why history often repeats itself. And one of the things about human nature, I'm not trying to sound like a psychologist here, but one of the things that I think history proves is that one of the things we are programmed as people with is the desire to belong. In fact, if you notice, if you put humans anywhere, a handful of people anywhere, one of the first things they start doing is trying to create things that they can join or be a part of. And that's true for nationhood and nation states. The concept of nationhood. Now, it's a new concept. I mean, before that but we had something, you know, we always had organizations, whether it was city-states or tribal organizations, but the advent of the nation-state is a normal evolution of human behavior because people think it's important to belong to something, and being part of a nation is important. And I think that's really true, obviously, increasingly in how geopolitical decisions are made. I think that's obvious and people understand that, but it's one of the things that we forgot. And we certainly forgot it at the end of the Cold War. If I can take you back to the end of the Cold War, and understand, for me, these are formative years because I grew up in the 80s, probably the greatest decade ever, confirmed by the, yeah. You know why I know this? Because my kids, I have well, I say young, they're like 24, 22, 20, just turned 20, and one who's 17. All they do is watch reruns from the 80s and 90s. They don't make good TV anymore. Everybody wants to watch stuff from the 80s and 90s. So that's just my pitch. The 70s were a dark period of time because of disco music. But in the 80s, we got a disco fan back there. But the 80s, you know, we did, the hair was a little too big, but other than that. But going back, the 80s, you grew up, and I remember in 1983, now I'm aging, I just turned 54. I feel 55, but it must be 1983. Do you guys remember a movie called oh gosh, what was it? It was about nuclear war. Do you remember this? It was No, War Games. That was a great movie. I'm talking about when I was on TV that scared the hell out of me. There was The Day After. Do you remember that movie, The Day After? This was traumatizing, and they had this thing on television. But basically grew up understanding that the world at any moment could end because the United States and the Soviet Union were headed for conflict and war, and that, you know, maybe we wouldn't even make it to 25 and things of this nature. I forgot about War Games. War Games is another good movie, where this guy hacks into the computer. This was an 80s hacker. This was not, I can remember the phone and the modem, and what was that actor? It was the same, Matthew Broderick. It's a great movie. I know I'm completely off topic, but let me just tell you, I lived in Las Vegas at the time, and if you recall, the first city that he blows up in the War Games is Las Vegas. And I was sitting in the audience, and so everybody's like chuckling. There's nothing funny about this Las Vegas strike. In any event, so this is where we grew up. And then in 1989 and 1990, 91, it was my first years in college, and literally the entire world just transformed before my very eyes. Understand, you grow up your whole life, and like the whole world is about the Soviet Union, and all of a sudden the Soviet Union no longer exists. My favorite memory of that is that I was actually taking a course that fall by a Soviet expert at, I think it was in Gainesville, Florida. And this poor guy's entire career came coming down over a 3-month period as the Soviet Union collapsed. It's like all these years of work, you have a PhD in Soviet studies, and now the Soviet doesn't exist anymore. So I don't know what he did after that. I need to check up on that guy. But anyways, the point is the whole world transformed.
Hi, Clint Kuhns here with Anderson Business Advisors, and
Oh my God.
And there was this effusive exuberance, the belief that the Cold War is over, we won, and now the entire world is going to become just like us. Free enterprise democracies. That was a very idealistic thing to believe. But here's the other conclusion they made, and that is that nationhood no longer mattered when it came to economics. That right now the world would no longer have borders. It wouldn't matter where things were made. What mattered is they were made in the most efficient place. And it became mantra. And look, I think it became part of Republican orthodoxy for a very long time, an orthodoxy that I came up in, which was, It's okay if productive capacity moves to another country, because what that will do is it will free up our workers to do work that's even more productive and pays them more. It was the famous or the infamous idea that who cares that you lost your job at a factory, you're going to learn how to code, and then you're going to make a lot more money doing that. Well, it was completely unrealistic, number one, and became incredibly disruptive that that decision was made. But here's the other implication of it. It robbed the nation of its industrial capacity, of its ability to make things. And its industrial capacity and its ability to make things has two ramifications. The first is it hurts your economy. It hurts your country. It robs people of jobs, and the transition is not nearly as easy, but it also ends up becoming corrosive and destructive to communities. And as a result, we had a Rust Belt. We had places that were gutted. And we had families that for generations had worked in a certain field or for a certain company, and all of a sudden that company or that field vanished because it moved somewhere else where it was cheaper to do, and those jobs were gone, and obviously became incredibly destructive, not just for the United States, by the way, but for many nations in the industrialized West. But the other thing it robbed us of is the ability to make things, which is a national security impairment, and a very significant one. If you go back...
All right, so we've watched Rubio a little bit. My thoughts on Rubio are this. Number one, he's learning a ton from being around Donald Trump. Just watching him speak here versus watching him speak and running for president and times in the past, it's like his confidence has gone to a whole other level where he feels more confident in speaking to people. Like he understands how to win over an audience better than he did before. Now, listen, he is a senator. He's a politician. He's been in the game for a very long time, so I doubt he has any issues public speaking. But there was a certain thing about Marco before, like when Trump called him Little Marco in 2015 and 2016. I mean, the reason why it stuck is because you could sense that there was something within him that was smaller. There was something within him that lacked a certain level of confidence on this high stage, this high level stage. Now he's Secretary of State, one of the most important jobs in the executive branch, one of the most important jobs. This is the main thing that people were talking about when Hillary Clinton was running for office. They were like, she's the most qualified person ever to run for office, you know? She was the wife of a president. She was a senator. She was Secretary of State. Now, Marco Rubio can't become anybody's wife. He can't marry Trump or anything. But he's got the other two down. He's the senator, and now he's Secretary of State. And so I feel like that positions him almost perfectly, almost even better in some cases than J.D. Vance. And so this is going to be very, very interesting over the next couple of years to see how this plays out. If Trump gets his third term, then yeah, we can put this on the back burner. But if Trump doesn't get his third term and Republicans are still in a good standing and they haven't screwed it all up as they are prone to do, Marco Rubio, in my opinion, right now is winning the race in terms of public opinion to be the next president of the United States. And I'll tell you why. Number one, he speaks in a way that's more relatable to the average person. When I listen to Marco Rubio speak, I can understand what he's saying. I feel like he's a relatable person. I feel like he's not talking down to me. And I'll show you J.D. Vance, but I like J.D. Vance, man. I like J.D. Vance. But when he talks, he sounds like he's talking down to you. It doesn't matter what he's talking about. It just sounds like he understands the joke and you don't. And well, you know, he just kind of talks in this arrogant manner. I don't know if he realizes that. I don't know if he's aware of it, but he definitely does that, and it's a huge turnoff. Number two, Marco Rubio is a Cuban man. He's Hispanic, and so although we are starting to whittle away at this DEI woke ideology, the fact still remains. We are in 2025. We're pushing forward 2028 and beyond, and people know that there's no going back. There's no going back to a society where this is deemed a quote unquote white country. I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen. Now, can we all come to a consensus on culture? That doesn't mean white, black, or the other, but a culture that has decency and a certain level of decorum. And there's a place that we can all meet in the middle and call it American, and that may have in the past been thought of as white culture. Yeah, sure, we can do that. But this country is more and more progressively, if anything, becoming more and more Hispanic. And so when they get out from underneath Trump, who is going to have more mass appeal to the American people as a whole? I think Marco Rubio has that hands down, because JD Vance he's still got that white boy thing, man. And it's like, I don't have a problem. I'm not biased. Listen, I'm going to go for the guy who's the best. But I'm talking about the rest of the country. He's still like, will people be in a frame of mind where they'll be like, yeah, I'm going to vote for that white boy, versus, yeah, I'm going to vote for this Cuban guy who came from Cuban immigrant parents, became the Secretary of State, and negotiated with Ukraine, Iran, the Middle Eastern countries, China. Like, it's like right now, JD Vance, the only thing he's got going for him is that his wife is Indian, and he's, completing the relationship with Modi in India. That's really all he's got going for him in terms of his scorecard in this administration. Outside of that, he doesn't really do much for the administration. He doesn't do much for his own political profile. He's in a great position in being over the Republican convention, the committee, in terms of their funding. He can go right into the purses of the people who are donors in the Republican Party. He's got that access, JD Vance. But in terms of the scorecard of what people are going to see and what they're going to look at and what they're going to understand and notice, Marco Rubio's a little ahead. Now, I don't know. I've never seen Marco Rubio's wife, but I do know JD Vance's wife is a big, big plus bonus for the future America that they're trying to build. The future America will have, even though they made a big kerfuffle about the H-1B visa people, doing this deal with India, is they're trying to replace the need for reliance on China for their manufacturing that they're offshoring for other companies, and then also their technical needs and desires. Indian people are, Asian people are very, very well represented in engineering and sciences and things of that nature, and that's not going to change. And so that relationship is something that they're trying to foster and create. So I think, if JD were to run for president, let's just say 2028, let's forget Trump's third term. If JD were to run for president in 2028, his wife would almost need to be so front and center to remind people that A, even though he's a white boy, he's not a racist. And B, just because he comes across as arrogant doesn't mean that he's not, he's not really arrogant, right? I don't know how JD gets over this fact, because I think that's the major number one turnoff for me, is that he comes across as very arrogant. And it's probably because he has a chip on his shoulder from being dirt poor. But he also does this thing, and we'll look at it right now in a second, that he speaks like an Ivy Leaguer. He definitely speaks like a guy who went to Yale. He definitely speaks like a Yale lawyer. And that's one thing that, Marco Rubio's not doing. He doesn't speak like a Yale lawyer. Marco Rubio's never really spoken like that. But JD Vance, and I get it, JD's very smart. I appreciate all of that. I appreciate his qualities. But when I'm talking about the president of the United States, Trump, first of all, only racist people look at Trump and go, he's a white man. Everybody else who doesn't really see things in that way go, Trump is Trump. Trump is orange. Trump is his own unique entity unto himself. He's not one thing or another. But JD Vance is going to have a very difficult time breaking away from this stereotypical white boy, Ivy League, arrogant suburban kid. And listen, I know he grew up in Appalachia. I know he's had an extremely rough life. That has nothing to do with it. It's all about how you come across to the American people. That's all it's about. That's all we're talking about. So let's take a look at JD Vance, and I will show you exactly what I mean in terms of he's a very educated man. I think Trump wanted him. I think Don Jr. wanted him because they need to be able to speak to the intelligentsia. They need to be able to speak to the elite classes that Trump doesn't necessarily speak to anymore. I'm sure if you got to talk to Trump one-on-one and you're let's say you're a guy who owns a business and you're worth $250 million, he could talk to you the same way that JD does. But that's just not his way. He's the president now. And when you become president, you become a larger than life figure. JD's job is to almost bring the people into the fold, almost like an Eric Weinstein or, the what do they call it? The dark, they called it something like the dark web intelligentsia or whatever, the Joe Rogan intellectual people, the Jordan Peterson type folks, the people who are intellectual and can speak to things with more gravitas, the people who can, break things down in a more eloquent way. Trump speaks for the masses and he speaks in a very simplistic way. And so you need to have that balance. I think that's why JD was brought in, but we're going to listen and we're going to see what I mean by when we talk about somebody who talks like they're an Ivy Leaguer.
Bad people so much as oblivious. But I'm curious what your experience has been engaging with those folks. But how would you describe, what do they look out at America and see, and what is helpful in communicating to them why this is a problem and why they need to care?
Yeah, so let me give you kind of an elite answer to that question, and let me give you just a sort of normal political answer to the question. So the elite answer to the question, I remember, Warren, talking to you about starting American Compass 5 years ago. And I think one of the things that we talked about, I don't know if you remember this, but what is the audience of donors, because these things cost money, funding fellowships and smart people to write papers and think about this stuff, like that costs resources. Like, what is the universe of donors who would actually support something like this? And I think my takeaway of the last 5 years is actually quite a bit. And I think there's an assumption among, whether you call it populists or whether you call it, sort of trade hawks or like whatever label you want to put on it, there's this assumption that donors are fundamentally misaligned. And I actually think donors are much more pragmatic, and they see this stuff not necessarily because, they're reading like a paper that Bob Lighthizer published 15 or 20 years ago. And I know Bob's in the audience and I love Bob. But because like they do business in China, and they know how hard it is to actually get a fair deal for their companies, or, they've seen some of the ways in which, I met with an industry leader today who was talking about all of the ways in which transshipping through non-Chinese Asian economies is destroying his very successful manufacturing business. And he's not worried about it for himself because his business is so successful, but he's worried about it for his industry writ large because some of his competitors are going to have their businesses destroyed. He doesn't want that. So there's a bit there. I think one thing to take away is that people are much less ideological and much more pragmatic than I think that a lot of the intellectuals give them credit for. So that's one thing I take away. I think the other thing that I take away from it is
effective, healthy blood pressure support takes more than innovation.
See, like, there's a certain arrogance about JD, and I can't put my finger on it.
With our way of thinking about things than people realize. And I think the misalignment between the normal American and the talking heads in Washington is still so profound. And I'll give you an example of this. One of the very first truly political speeches I gave when I was thinking about running for Senate in Ohio back in 2021, I spoke to this group in Butler County, Ohio. It's actually the county that I was born and raised in southwestern Ohio. And I was talking about how, big tech was a major problem. Censorship of viewpoints was a major problem. And we needed to get serious about antitrust, and we need to get serious about actually treating these companies as the monopolists that they were. And a person came up to me afterwards and they said, "Oh, I really liked what you said, but I didn't agree with what you said on big tech." And I sort of assumed that I was about to, sort of hear a kind of libertarian argument from the pages of the National Review. And what the guy said is, "I don't think that we should break these companies up. I think we should throw all of their executives in prison." And I was like, oh. And it's sort of dawned on me, the American people, like, they see these problems. They're not hyper ideological. They're not reading like conservative intellectual periodicals because they have day jobs and families to take care of, but they're much, much wiser about these things than intellectuals give them credit for. And I take a lot of inspiration for that, but I also take a lot of willingness to kind of test the outer limits, because most of our fellow Americans, they're not nearly as dumb as Washington, D.C. assumes that they are. They're actually very smart and they're very wise.
Yeah.
See, JD is doing a lot of like lip service to like how smart the average American is and blah, 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 blah. But the way in which he does it doesn't make you, it doesn't, if there's a certain, it's like a feeling of insincerity about it. Almost like, well, he has to say that to counteract the way that he speaks and the way that he talks. Whereas Trump would just say, aren't you guys smart? Man, you guys are smart, aren't you? He's a bright one out there. Yeah, look at that guy. He looks like he's got a high IQ. They don't think you're smart. That's how Trump would like say it. And it'd be very like, dumbed down, right? But it's like you would believe what he's saying because there's a certain level of emotional content that he places into his actions. And JD seems like he's like a cut off head, like a balloon that's being held up. His head's like the balloon, it's floating in the air. And it's so intellectual, hyper intellectual, the way that he speaks. And I know that that's how I am, but that's me explaining. That's not me campaigning or anything, but that it's not necessarily very relatable. And so I want to see how that would change. I want to see JD on the campaign trail as presidential candidate JD Vance. Like, what would that like? We've already seen presidential candidate Marco Rubio. We've already seen that. So we already know it's like it'll only get better because you can't get any worse if you've, progressed further and you've become a better and better and better statesman and politician like Marco Rubio is clearly obviously becoming. So he's not going to be worse than what he was when he ran in 2015. But we've already seen Marco Rubio. We've already seen, and that almost is weird because that time period was like a bygone era of politics that we won't see again for a very, very long time because Trump changed all that, flipped it on his head. But I think JD can only really campaign in the Rust Belt states, in some southern states, like in some southern places. Like, dude, how is JD cannot campaign in all the places that Trump campaigned. And this is the thing too. Trump is smart enough to know that the base of MAGA is typically, blue collar, white majority. Got it. Sure. And those people live in specific places, but Trump has mass appeal over decades and decades and 40 decades or so of being in the media, being on television, knowing how to talk to the camera, knowing how to wow an audience, knowing how to play the media. JD doesn't have that kind of experience, and so I'm like curious. Marco Rubio even has more experience as a politician or a senator than JD Vance has. And so I'm like, people are sitting there going, oh, well, JD is going to be he's going to be the heir apparent to the Republican Party. And I'm like, not so fast. Not so fast. Marco Rubio is taking on a lot of different jobs. Secretary of State. He is front and center all the time. To catch what JD Vance is doing, you have to really be into politics to see what he's doing. You have to really, really know. You have to find the live streams of him cutting a ribbon somewhere or him going and having a meeting somewhere. But Marco Rubio is front and center newsworthy. He's on Fox. JD Vance hasn't even been on Fox News that often. Marco Rubio is one of the talking heads. He'll pop up on Fox all the time. And so this is my point. People are almost giving a foregone conclusion to what is happening in Republican politics because of the way things used to go in the 20th century. They got to let that go, man. The way things have happened in the 20th century, that the way of doing things is gone. It's over. Trump has changed everything. And not only Trump, the old world order has collapsed. The old Bretton Woods agreements and the post-World War II era way of doing things is falling apart. And so there's going to have to be a new way of doing things. We have new technologies. And so just someone having been vice president, and it never has been like this, but it's been more common in the past. Someone just being vice president does not automatically make them a shoo-in or a great fit to be the next president. And I think that unless JD is holding back and he's secretly got some huge ace up his sleeve that we haven't seen and I haven't seen yet, I'm not sure that JD is the one. I like JD quite a bit. I just don't know how he overcomes like a JD Vance versus a Gavin Newsom. I don't know how JD Vance overcomes just in the look test, just on the superficial face value look test. I don't know how he beats Gavin Newsom in 2028. I don't know how he does it. Gavin Newsom, because this is the one thing Gavin Newsom understands. Most people don't know shit about politics. Most people don't know shit about making policy. Most people don't know shit about anything. They just know, do I have money to buy groceries? Can I put gas in my tank? Am I able to save up money? Can I go on vacation every once in a while? Can I live a good life? And is this guy not an asshole? Does he not piss me off when I see his face on television? That's all people care about. That's all people care about. And to me, I personally think if JD Vance shows up on TV all the time, people are going to be like, get this arrogant asshole white boy off my screen. His face is like a punchable face. Marco Rubio is not like that. He's actually, somewhat handsome. Pause, no homo. He's somewhat handsome, which is amazing because Trump is such a weird looking person. It's just a force of nature that he became president. But so that's the thing. If you're an ugly person in politics, you got to be a force of nature. Or if you're not necessarily a force of nature, you got to be handsome for politics, like a Barack Obama, a Bill Clinton. Marco Rubio, look at Marco. He's pretty handsome in comparison to JD Vance, who is not really that handsome. Whatever. He's just not universally, like, people wouldn't go side by side comparison. Oh yeah, that guy's more handsome or easier on the eyes than Marco Rubio. No, I don't think that's happening. And so, not to, be be a man judging men like this too much, but I'm just saying for political reasons, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it, JD. Like, you got to do more, JD. Like, I think in any other circumstance, at any other time period, JD would be more than enough to be president. But we live in extraordinary times. How do you follow up a president like Trump unless you were in the trenches with him side by side every single day doing what Marco Rubio does? And people are going to know that. They're going to sense that. They're going to feel that. And so I'm not of the mindset like everybody else that JD is the one. No, not in the slightest. And I feel bad for him for that because, but just not looking like that's in the cards. But we're still really, really long way out from 2028 or 2032 or whatever. We're still a long ways out. And I have a feeling that anybody who was part of the MAGA coalition, the Trump coalition, the people who were with Trump during this time are going to be something like the second generation of founding fathers, because when this country was first founded, it's like a lot of the founding fathers were essentially taking their turn being president. Every single one of them was the people in the minds of the people. They were entitled to be president for having fought through the revolution. And so we're still going through this revolution. We're still going through this time period where we're still fighting against globalization. This is what these talking points were about. This is what Marco Rubio was talking about in this video. This is what JD Vance was talking about at the American Compass Gala, is that globalization has not worked. Where basically, essentially, you take components from all over the world and assemble them in places all over the world and then send them to another part of the world for consumption. That has not worked. It has only made other countries poorer. A few countries have gotten slightly richer, but it's brought everybody down to the same level of poor, of developing nation, second-class country. And It's given the ruling classes of America, the financiers, the bankers, control over who wins and who loses, and that's just not fair, especially when we have so much at our disposal. There was a Japanese person who ended up becoming I don't remember their name, but they ended up becoming the architect of the Pearl Harbor invasion attack. And they had studied in America previously, and they were firmly against the Pearl Harbor attack because they said, America may not look like they're good right now. They don't look like they're good to go right now, but they have so many natural resources that if they actually get turned on to fight, it won't be long before we're destroyed, because we have wood, we have iron, we have steel, we have energy, natural gas, we have clean water here, we have plenty of farmland. We can sustain ourselves if every country in the world turned against us. But Japan, not the case. And so globalization has almost tried to even the playing field by handicapping America, which is why we love this culture of being handicapped. We love this culture of being disabled. We love this culture of being a victim, because that's essentially what the globalists, what the UN, what these trade organizations, what these bankers have done to America. They've disabled America. If we were unfucked with for the last 60 years, I mean, it would be unfair how much farther ahead we'd be. And to be honest, you can't really say with any certainty that we would have given back to all these other countries. So, but we're here now. It is what it is. And we understand that globalization hasn't worked. So now we're pivoting towards nationalism. We're pivoting towards the nation state being the supreme factor in terms of decision making and the engine for the economy on a global scale, rather than listening to, consultants and lawyers and a bunch of people in an international community that don't give a damn about the person in Indiana or Minnesota or Michigan. They don't care about those people. And so America First isn't even about that. That's what's so funny. It's like people, Trump cares about me. Like, I don't even think it's about that, dude. The best things are when the side effect of fixing the problem is you are taken care of. And the side effect of Trump bringing everything back and America First is that we're rebalancing the world, and it's going to make Americans richer. That's the side effect. It's not like that's not Trump's number one aim. His number one aim is to get rid of this mental illness that's infected our country and create a society that can sustain itself going forward with these declining birth rates. Bring them back up and encourage people to have families so that we can move forward, not just as a nation, but as a world, because almost all nations throughout the world are having declining birth rates. But get rid of this mental illness, and by default, everybody else will be made richer. Our lives will be enriched. So that's almost the best alternative to have, is if you are doing an action, and then the side effect of that action is just more good for other people involved. That's fantastic. So that's my spiel on JD versus Marco. I think Marco is doing a fantastic job. When Marco was done speaking, maybe we can look at that really quick. He basically gave JD a whole bunch of kudos, said, I loved working with him in Senate. Marco Rubio is becoming a very, very shrewd politician. I mean, he probably already was, because he was a sleeper and the Democrats thought that he was a rhino, and he's turning out to be an America First Republican, not a rhino. But when he ends his speech, he basically says, JD, was great. He's the man right now. He's the man of the hour, all that stuff, which is the thing that you should do. That's the smart thing that you should do when you're not in a position to combat somebody, or it would be in bad form to do that at this position, in this place, in this time anyway, but they are in competition for that top spot. And I think Marco wants it more, to be quite frank. I think JD, I don't think he actually wants it as much as he might think he does. But Marco, they're in competition. But when you're not in a position to openly argue or be the aggressor, the best thing to do, which I know Trump has taught Marco just through osmosis, is you ingratiate yourself toward them. You give them lots of credit. You give them lots of due. You know, say nice things about them. Notice that Trump will say nice things about people that you're like, what? He said nice thing, because Trump knows that's all part of the long-term plan. So let's listen to what Marco has to say here, and then we'll wrap it up. Just want to go full screen. Okay, there we go.
I can say that now that I got 99 votes. I don't need their votes anymore. But the Vice President's doing a phenomenal job, and I think is one of the most powerful and clearest voices in the world, really at the edge, at the leading edge of this new thinking in American politics. And it's my honor to serve with him in this administration, and it's my honor to invite him onto the stage now to speak to all of you. So thank you for the opportunity to be here, ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance.
So as you can see, like brilliant, being a brilliant politician. He opens up, he has a great speech. He does a great job. He uses so many Trumpisms and Trump mannerisms that he obviously picked up, that he's learned how to be more, approachable. Because Trump does all these things that are disarming. You can't help but think, oh, that guy. And so Rubio is learning that. And I don't think JD understands that. It's like he wants to be taken seriously, and so he does not self-deprecate in a way that makes you feel like you can relate to him. He's self-deprecating in a way where you're like, you're just doing that for my sake, aren't you? You're not doing that because you actually believe that, or you want. Trump does it in a way where it's like, you feel like he's really being genuine about it. And so that's the thing I think is the problem for JD. I think he has a problem with coming across as being genuine. I don't know if he is. I'm not saying he isn't, but he has a problem coming across that way. And then he has that whole his look and his arrogant kind of mannerisms are going to be an obstacle for him. That's just speaking in general terms of just how people perceive politicians when they run for president and what people want from their president. And we'll see how it goes. So,
well, that's a perfect segue into my spiel. So
Great.
Thank you. I had a few different spiels we could start
like
with,
that,
but this is a
that
good
laugh.
one. We are thrilled to have you here.
laugh.
I am thrilled to have this opportunity to talk with you, and so grateful that the work you're doing, and in a sense so in awe of it, because there are politicians out there they've just been politicians, but you are someone who was an intellectual first. Some people don't like the word intellectual, but I mean it in the good sense of the term. You were writing for National Review. You were at the bar late at night arguing about and helping shape these ideas that you are now.
I come here for free and you insult me and you call me an intellectual. Remind me that I wrote for National Review. What an asshole this guy is.
That's fair. I will admit that I too wrote for National Review. But
Yeah, see, I don't know. Go watch this video yourself. Let me know what you guys think. I still don't feel like JD has necessarily figured it out quite yet, the position. But I guess I can't say I blame him. Like he said, he ran for Senate in 2021. Barely finished the term, and now he's a vice president. I mean, good God. So, yeah, Godspeed to him. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for tuning in. We will be back next time, and then we're going to be talking about Ukraine, Russia. We're going to be talking about all the corruption going on there and how crazy the world is getting right before our eyes. But thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more. We will be